Hi there and welcome back to the Python Mastery Crash Course. I'm Gority Golden and I'm super excited to help you master the fundamentals of Python programming. In this video, we are going to explore the world of control flow statements in Python, including the if-else statements, the while loops, and the for loops. So let's get started. So what are control flow statements? Control flow statements are statements that control the flow of your program's execution in a way that they allow you to make decisions, repeat tasks, and skip over code. So without control flow statements, your program would execute from bottom to top without any flexibility or any kind of decision making. So generally, they allow your program to take different paths based on conditions and to repeat tasks until a condition is met. So let's have a look at the different types of the control flow statements. There are several types of control flow statements in Python, including the if-else statements, and these are always used to make decisions based on conditions. And we also have the while loops, which are used to repeat tasks until a condition is met. And lastly, we also have the for loops, and the for loops are always used to repeat tasks for each item in a sequence. So we are going to explore each of these types of control flow statements in more details with examples and real-world scenarios. So we are going to first look at the if-else statements, and like I had said before, the if-else statements are used to make decisions based on conditions. So first of all, we are going to look at the syntax of how the if-else statements are written. So the syntax of the if-else statements is very simple in that we always start with the if keyword and then we follow it up with a condition that we want to work with, that we want to test. And then we always add the colons. And the fact that the word condition is not a keyword in Python, I'm going to go ahead and first of all comment the syntax. So having written the condition, you always have to follow it up with the block of code. One thing that you have to keep in mind regarding the control flow statements is that they always work with indentation, meaning that having you written the first statement of the if keyword and then the condition, you always have to leave space such that you indent this statement. So if then the condition, so the block of code is always indented within the scope of the if statement. So this can be block of code. So we bring in the block of code. And then there are also times whereby we also work with the else keyword in a way that if we are only having one condition and the condition is false, then by default we have to go ahead and execute the other statement that is within the else statement. So precisely, I can also bring it in here. So by saying else, and then you always follow it up with the colons as well. And then I'm just going to go ahead and copy this and paste it here. And same case, I'm going to go ahead and comment this out. So that is the general syntax. I know currently it's not so clear, but we are going to understand it furthermore when we look at different examples. So for example, let's say that we want to write a program that checks if a person is eligible to vote based on their age. So we can use an if-else statement to achieve this. So we are going to work with a variable age in that currently it stores 24 as the age value. And then to work with the if-else statement, the first thing is that we always work with the if keyword, then we bring in the condition. So the condition is going to work in a way that we want to check if the age is greater or equal to 18, in a way that people who are eligible to vote are people that are above 18 or equal to 18, in a way that you are either 18 or your age is above 18. So that means that we are going to work with the variable in a way that we say if the age is greater or equal to 18, then we want to go ahead and return a simple print statement for now. So we are going to go ahead and say print you are eligible to vote. That is it for now. Now there are cases whereby, okay, first of all, let's go ahead and test this out. So when I run the program, the output that I am getting is that you are eligible to vote, and this is true. But for cases whereby we are having an age that is actually less than 18, ages like 10, 11, or 5, meaning that these people are not eligible to vote. So the way we work with such conditions is by working with the else keyword. So you bring in the else keyword, then you go ahead and also provide it with a statement. Now for this case, we are also going to work with this statement, but to make it different, we are just going to go ahead and update this to you are not eligible to vote. That means that for ages that are less than 18, these people will not be able to vote. So for us to practically see the output of this, we have to go ahead and at least provide an age that is below 18, for example 16. And I'm going to go ahead and run this. So when I run the program, the output is that you are not eligible to vote, and this is true. So generally with this example, we check if the person's age is greater than or equal to 18. And if it is, we print a message saying you are eligible to vote. Otherwise, we print a message saying that you are not eligible to vote. So when the program is being run, this statement is going to be executed in a way that the age variable is going to be substituted in a way that the value for the age variable is going to be substituted in this condition. So since it is 16, we are going to have 16 is 16 greater or equal to 18, which is false because 16 is not actually greater or equal to 18. That means that this condition is going to be false and this statement cannot be printed. So hence, therefore, the program is going to go ahead and execute this other statement whereby you are not eligible to vote. So it is the same case that happens if we still had our value being assigned to 24, meaning that 24 is going to be assigned in this condition, and then you have a comparison in a way that is 24 greater or equal to 18, which is true because 24 is greater than 18. And that means that this statement is still going to be executed. Now, in addition to the if-else statements, there would also be cases whereby we are working with more than one condition. For example, if we wanted to grade student marks, we can work with the if-else statements in a way that, one, we do believe that we are always going to be having a particular range that is going to be used for grading. For example, between 90 to 100, we assign these students an A. Actually, it's better if we write it this way such that we comment it out. And then between 80 to 89, we assign the student mark as a B. And then between 70 to 79, you can assign a student mark a C. And between 60 to 69, we can assign the student mark as a D. And then between 50 to 59, we can assign the student mark as an E. And then between 40 to 49, we can assign the student mark as an F. And then anything below or equal to 30 can be assigned as a fail. Now for such a grading range, we are now going to go ahead and work with the if-else statements in a way that, one, we are going to ask a student to enter the mark that they scored, and whenever the student enters the mark that they scored, we go ahead and grade that student mark based on our grading criteria. So first things first, we are going to work with a variable called student mark, and the student mark is going to be assigned to the mark that the student scored in a particular subject, for example. And we are going to work with the integers, meaning that, one, we are going to cast, because we know that we are going to work with the input function, and by default the input function returns a type of string from the keyboard. And within the input, we are going to enter our prompt string, which is going to be enter the mark scored. And having written the prompt string, we are now going to go ahead and work with this variable. So the student mark is going to be storing the mark that the student stored, and we are now going to work with this variable in a way that we apply our condition such that we grade the student based on the particular marks that they scored. So this is going to be if. Now when you look at our ranges, we're having 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 and then 7. So generally these are like 7 conditions. Now cases whereby we are going to work with the if and else, if and then the else statements, we only cater for 6 conditions and then we bring in the last condition using the else statement. So how this works practically is, 1, we are going to cater for the first condition, whereby the first condition is a range between 90 to 100. So that means that we are going to say if the student mark is greater or equal to 90, we can actually work with the parentheses as well, and the same student mark must now be less than or equal to 100. Then you go ahead and terminate this with a colon. So if this is true, we want to go ahead and print a simple message like you scored an A. So having catered for the first condition, we are now going to go ahead and cater for the second condition. So the second condition is a range between 80 to 89. And the fact that this is the second condition, we are not going to work with the if keyword. We are going to work with the else if instead, and still it also takes in the syntax of the condition. And now since we are catering for the second condition, this is going to be an 80 and then less than or equal to 89. Then we also have to go ahead and cater for its block of code, and for this one we are going to still print but the grade value is going to be a B. So this applies for all these other conditions. I'm going to move out of the scope of this else if condition, then do the same here, and I think we do the same here. Then because of indentation, we have to update this here. So we now have to update or to cater for the 70 and then the 60 ranges. So this is going to be 70 and then less than or equal to 79, and this is going to be a C. And then for the 60, this is going to be a 60 and then it should be less than or equal to 69, such that the student scores a D. And then in terms of the 50, this is going to be 50 and then it must be less than or equal to a 59, such that the student scores an E. So I'm going to copy this as well and cater it up for the range of 40 to 49. So this is going to be 40 and the student mark should be less than or equal to 49. So you see that currently we are catering for 6 conditions. So we are only left with, I think for the 40 to 49, it's an F. Now we have catered for 6 conditions and now we are left with the last condition. Now for the last condition, we do not have to bring in the else if, but rather we have to work with the else statement. So now why I'm bringing in the else statement is because it's only going to work if all these 6 conditions are false, such that it automatically assigns the student a fail if all those conditions are false. So this is just going to be print you failed. This print statement containing you failed is only going to be executed or outputted if all the above 6 conditions are false. So now we are going to go ahead and test our program. So precisely, I'm going to first of all comment this first example such that we can go ahead and test this other example. So enter the mark score. So we can actually update this so that it sounds better. So enter the mark scored. And we can also have a clear up of the terminal. So we are going to test our program starting from the first range. So let's assume that the student actually scored a 90. So you can see that when we enter 90, the student will have scored an A. So I'm going to go ahead and run this program very fast such that we can go ahead and test it furthermore. So let's say that now the student scored a 95, it's still going to be an A. And if now we cater for the second range, which is maybe an 89, it's a B. And then for an 86, it's also a B. Then let's say that this time we want to test out for a 79, it must be a C. And then if we test up for a 70, it must be a C. And let's also test up for a 68, which will be a D. And we can also test up for a 64, it's going to be a D as well. And we can also test up for a 59, which is an E, and then a 54. And lastly, we are going to test the program with a 28, which is going to be a failed. So the way the program is being executed is that one, when the student enters a mark, like for example, we started with 90, meaning that the program is going to assign 90 as a value for the variable student mark, and it's going to test for the first if condition, is 90 greater or equal to 90. And now the fact that we are working with logic operators, and now for this statement whereby we are having you scored an A, for it to be executed first, both conditions must be true, meaning that the condition in this first parenthesis must be true, and same applies to this other condition. So the fact that 90 is actually equal to 90, and also 90 is less than 100, meaning that this statement is going to be executed. Now for cases whereby we pass in a value like 88, the program is going to test for the first condition, and since 88 is actually not greater or equal to 90, then that means that we are already having a false output here, meaning that this first condition is going to be false, and the program goes ahead and moves to this condition. Now it passes in the value, and for this case it's going to be true since our value is now greater than 80, and still the value is also less than 89. That means that it's going to go ahead and now output this statement. It is the same procedure for all these other conditions and according to the value that we are passing in. So next up, let's talk about the while loops. And the while loops are used to execute a block of code repeatedly while a condition is true. So the syntax for the while loop is also pretty simple, in that we always start with a while, then we follow it up with a condition, then we terminate with a semicolon, with a colon, and then we go ahead and provide a block of code. So I'm going to go ahead and comment this out. So for example, let's say that we want to write a program that prints numbers from 1 to 10. So we can use a while loop to achieve this. So for us to print numbers from 1 to 10, so the first number is going to be 1. So with the fact that we want our first number to be 1, we are going to work with a variable like I. That is going to store the first number, in that we do not start from 0. So I being assigned to 1. And then to bring in the while loop, we start with while. So while our current value, which is I, is less than or equal to. So the fact that we only want a range from 1 to 10, that means that our condition must be less than or equal to 10. And then the block of code for this case is going to be us printing the numbers. So print I. And now since we also want to repeatedly carry out this task, we are going to work with our current value, which is I, such that we increment it furthermore. So this is going to be plus equal to 1. So for that case, I'm going to go ahead and run the program by first of all commenting this out. And having commented that out, I'm just going to go ahead and run we can actually just open up the terminal, clear it up, and run the program. So you can see that we are printing the numbers from 1 to 10. So it's pretty similar if we actually wanted to work with numbers from maybe 0 to 20. So that means that 20 is going to be inclusive, and we go ahead and test the program. So you can see that the first number is 0, so we start from 0 to 20. And cases whereby it's maybe we are maybe required to have a range from 0 to 19, that means that we are not going to work with the equal to operators in a way that we do not want to make 20 inclusive. So to test this as well, so you can see that we are starting from 0 then to 19. So generally, regarding this kind of example, we start with, okay, I'm actually going to take this back to what we had started with. So regarding our current example, we start with a variable I that is set to 1. We then enter a while loop that continues to execute as long as the I variable is less than or equal to 10. So inside the loop, we print the value I and increment it by 1. That is generally the whole process. So finally, we can now look at the for loops. Regarding the for loops, they are used to execute a block of code repeatedly for each item in a sequence. That is key. So the syntax for the for loop is that we always start with the for keyword, then we pass in a variable that is going to be used to iterate through the sequence, and then we follow this up with the block of code that we want to work with. So I'm going to go ahead and comment this out as well. So for example, let's say that we want to write a program that prints the names of a list of students. We can use a for loop to achieve this in a way that, one, if we do have a variable called students that is storing the students list. For example, let's say that we have students like Anna, then we have Mary, and then we have Tim. So for us to be able to work with a for loop is that, one, we follow the syntax that has been defined, and the syntax says that we start with a for keyword and then a variable that is going to be, oh my bad, regarding the syntax, it's like I forgot to update it furthermore. So for the variable that we are using to iterate through the sequence, so for variable in the sequence, then we go ahead and provide the block of code. So the variable that we use to iterate through the sequence is always user defined, meaning that if our current variable is students, for us to be able to iterate over the students variable, we can actually use any user-defined variable as long as it is in line with what we are doing. For example, precisely, you can always work with the singular format of the current variable that is in a plural format. So since our current variable is students, we can bring in the variable as student to iterate over the sequence. Then we work with the in keyword. So for student in, then our sequence name or variable currently is students, which is a list. Then we go ahead and terminate. Then the block of code that we want to work with at this kind of time is, we can, I think, just print the names. So print, so when we are printing, regarding the block of code for this case, we still work with the variable that we are using to iterate. So if it is not student, you can still bring in any other name. For example, you can as well say name for name in students. So it's always all the same based on what you want to work with. So we are going to go with this approach. So we can now go ahead and test our program. So when I run the program, you can see that we are printing Anna, Mary, and Tim. So with the for loop, you can also use it to perform, for example, calculations. Like, for example, let's say that we have a variable called max that is storing the current marks of these 3 students. Let's say that Anne scored a 70 in a particular subject, like maybe mathematics, and Mary scored an 88, and then Tim scored a 90. So if we wanted to find the total marks scored, for example, so this is going to be total mark scored, such that initially we do not know the total marks scored by these 3 students. So that means that the total mark currently is going to be 0. So for us to be able to carry out the total mark using this list, we can actually work with the for loop in a way that we say for mark in marks. So what do we want to achieve? One, we want to go ahead and update the current total marks scored. So we are going to copy it up. So you copy it up and update it. So it's going to be a plus or equal to our mark variable. And since this is a loop, in a way that we only want to provide the final output of the total mark, so you move out of the code block and then you bring out the statement. So this is going to be print, and I'm going to work with the F formatter such that we say the total mark scored is, then we can pass in our variable, which is total mark scored. So precisely we can, I think, have this for now such that we test the program. So you can see that the total mark scored is 248. And that's it for today's video on control flow statements in Python. We have covered the if-else statements, the while loops, and the for loops, and saw how they can be used to implement real-world logic. Remember that practice makes perfect, and see you again in the next session.